All right, let's take a few minutes and talk about two more formula auditing tools, evaluate formula and error checking. So starting with evaluate formula, this is one of my all-time favorite tools, incredibly useful. It allows you to cycle through each individual calculation step within a formula and see how each component piece, each argument actually evaluates. And by doing this, by tracing the calculation path in this way, you can really pinpoint the source of any errors. So it's kind of a similar end result as tracing a dependent or precedent path, but this allows us to pull back the curtain a bit more and really see the inner workings of our formulas. So in the example shown here, if we were to press evaluate, Excel would work from the inside out and cycle through each individual calculation step of the formula until it gets to the end result displayed in the cell. And as you can see here, it's pretty clear something's gone wrong between steps 4 and 5, because step 5 is the first place where we see a value error appear, and that carries through to the final result in step 6. And it doesn't take long to realize that the problem is that we're trying to multiply a number by a text field. We're trying to multiply 499 by the word spoon, which is just obviously total nonsense, doesn't make sense, and that is the root cause or the source of our error. Now, pro tip here, evaluate formula is my go-to tool, not just for error checking, but also for just simply breaking down complex or unfamiliar formulas. In fact, this is often one of the first things I do when I'm faced with a really nasty nested function that's really complex, because this allows me to understand what component pieces are being used, how they're evaluating, and how they fit into the larger formula. Next up, we've got error checking. And what the error checking tool does is it scans your worksheet for any errors and then provides a summary with options to either trace the source using the trace precedence option, ignore the error, you can modify your Excel options, and you can even link out to Microsoft support. So here's what some of those options look like. That options button in the lower left really just opens up your Excel options dialog box where you can change your error handling or error checking rules. The trace error button will show the full precedent path and where the path breaks down, like we talked about in the last lecture. And then the help on this error button, that's going to link right out to the Microsoft support website, which is a great resource. It's going to talk about what that error means and some options for fixing it. And the other buttons here kind of speak for themselves. You can simply ignore the error and get rid of the flag. You can edit the formula in your formula bar, or you can proceed to the previous or next error in the worksheet. So with that, let's jump into Excel and practice using these tools. All right, so for those of you following along, we're still in the Formulas 101 workbook in the Auditing Tools tab, and we're going to continue working with this property calculator. And in this case, I want to focus on the tax rate value, this hard-coded value right here in cell H4. And specifically, I want to understand which other cells might be impacted if I were to change my tax rate. In other words, I want to know which cells are dependent upon H4. So like I showed you in the past lecture, trace dependence is a great way to do that. You can go ahead and click through to see the full calculation path. And this tells me that there are indeed two cells in this calculator that are dependent upon tax rate, the property tax and the monthly expenses. So with that said, let's say I hand this calculator off to a colleague who may not be quite as Excel savvy, and he says, you know what, I'm trying to do this estimation, but I have no idea what my tax rate should be. So I'll just put a placeholder and type a dash in there and press enter. So knowing that there are two dependent cells here, it's no surprise that the property tax and monthly expense values both yield errors. But what if we want to pull the cover back a little bit more and understand exactly where the error is first originating? That would be a great use case for the evaluate formula tool. So let's go ahead and select the property tax formula, which is the first place in the path where we see an error, and launch the evaluate formula option from our auditing tools. Now, this is where Excel is going to start from the inside out and allow us to click through and evaluate each component piece of our function to see exactly how it's working. So I'm going to pause here because everything's been great right up to this point. And now we see 499 times a dash. And it's no surprise that when we evaluate one more time, that's the first time we see this value error. And obviously an error divided by 12 yields another error, and that's what's populating here in our property tax cell. And you can restart and cycle through this each time. When you see cell references here, you do have the option to step in, which will select the referenced cell and show the value here in the box. But in this case, it's pretty clear exactly what's going on. We're trying to multiply a value by a text string. So let's close out. Let's remove our arrows. And I want to show you the error checking option now before we fix this error. Let's go ahead and choose error checking. And what this says is, okay, we've got an error in cell H15. This is no surprise. This is our property tax. And it's going to show us our formula right here. It's going to give a little description of the error. A value used in the formula is of the wrong data type, which makes sense. And check it out. We can change our options right here. If we want to adjust how we're handling errors or how we're flagging errors in our workbook, go ahead and cancel that. And we can resume to get back in. Help on this error would take me out to the Microsoft support website. And then watch this, show calculation steps. That's going to take me right into my evaluate formula dialog box, just like we walked through. So we can go ahead and close out of that. And then again, we can ignore the error. We can edit it in the formula bar, or we can say, you know what, let's check the sheet for another error. And here we go. We found a second error in cell J9. That's our monthly expenses cell. Again, shows the formula, gives a description. And this time we don't see the calculation steps language. We see trace error. And that's because this is a downstream formula. It has no dependence. So what trace error is going to do is basically pull up that precedent path, taking us all the way back to any precedent cells that impact this value. And just like we showed before, we can see by these arrows exactly where things are breaking down and trace it back to that text field in our tax rate cell. So we can go ahead and close out of here. We can remove our arrows and we can insert a value right back into the tax rate, like 9.5, and all is right with the world. So there you go, 2 more auditing tools, evaluate formula and error checking. Both incredibly helpful tools when you're working with formulas.